Our next speaker is Ros Harvey, and Ros is one of the leading lights of AgTech startups in Australia. Ros is the founder and managing director of The Yield. She's an experienced entrepreneur and executive in the field of technology, particularly in the IoT and user-centric design. After founding The Yield in 2014, Ros now leads an experienced team which brings together leading engineers, data scientists, agriculturalists and technologies. And each of these skills work together to make sure that their solutions are offering real outcomes for growers and industry. Ros is passionate about technology, passionate about technology playing a role in the sustainable governance of the planet, and is a sought-after speaker on AgTech, IoT, converting data to knowledge, and the future of food. Please welcome Ros.
Great. Thanks. It's terrific to be here today. It's obviously a really important event for IoT in Australia. It's also a super important event for The Yield because it happens to come in the very week that we're doing our national launch of our product called Sensing Plus. It is up there. It's down there, it looks a little bit gappy. Anyway, so what I really wanted to do is take the opportunity when Etienne asked me to speak and speaking with Andrea, was to really talk about what does it actually mean to try to take IoT in the real world, that you can take something to market that is actually going to be able to A, solve business problems, and B, for your business be profitable. Because ultimately, if you can't do that, then really you haven't got a business. And we often say that with The Yield, is that we called The Yield because if you couldn't affect that in AgTech, honestly, you really don't have a business. So I'm going to try and share what we've learned with brutal honesty about the good, the bad, and you know what I think it actually takes to do this in the real world. And I suppose some of the takeaways for me, the yawning things to take away from this is make sure you really understand the business problem that you're trying to solve. Build technology that's platform technology, but that can be rapidly repeated and scalable and enterprise grade into different problems that you're trying to solve. And really focus on getting the user experience at the end of the process right. Because if you don't do that, doesn't matter how well you do everything else, it just won't work. And the final thing that I'd say is I think is a much bigger issue around the business model for IoT and how to make actually businesses profitable is how can you get data to solve many problems? Because there is a cost in doing IoT, which involves putting hardware on the ground. There's a real cost, and you have to look at what are the different ways that you can actually monetize that if it's going to be successful from a business model perspective. So just a quick bit about The Yield, and Andrew's already sort of given you a bit of a rundown. We are a very young business. I mean, we're 2.5 years old. And we chose Australia to actually really develop our technology for a very clear reason. And that's some of the things that Michael already spoke about. Australia is the most hardest place in the world to make a buck if you're a grower. It is the most open economy in the world. We have no subsidies. We've got the highest labour costs. We're the driest continent on the planet. We are affected by climate change. Input costs are rising, and we've got to ship everything if we want to sell it overseas. This is not an easy place to grow. And I can tell you, Tasmania, where I'm from, it's even harder because it costs us more to get something to Melbourne than it does to Hong Kong in terms of shipping. It's hard. So why is that a great thing? That is a fabulous thing if you want to be an AgTech leader, because it means we have got willing, motivated customers who want to work with us to solve business problems, and they're already innovative and productive, and they're open. So our business strategy has always been to innovate here, to nail the technology here, and then to scale it globally. And that is why we work with some of the world's biggest IT giants, is because that's exactly what the game plan is. So Bosch is an investor in our business. We've raised something like $11.5 million. We intend to do this at scale. KPMG is also an investor, AgFunder. We work really closely with Microsoft. We're bringing together the technology partners that can help us scale. So we think about what we do is how do we hyper-contextualize and solve a business problem, but build technology that is scalable and repeatable and enterprise grade. And I'm going to come back to that again and again and again, because the real business is data. It's not IoT, it's data. And it's data analytics. And you have to be able to do measurement systems to really be able to, and what we do is build end-to-end scalable solutions, because unless you control the whole data provenance, then it's actually really hard to be a data business and do data analytics. So what we do as a business is we do end-to-end solutions. So that goes from doing hardware, platform, bringing in data from a whole variety of sources, analytics, and then putting that into user experiences that solve real problems. And I'm going to come back to the AI piece of this. But see that single little red drop that's on that screen? This is from our free app. Free app. You're very welcome to download it. That is measuring evapotranspiration. This is the amount of water that a plant uses from evaporation and transpiration that changes through its growth curve. Okay? We crunch 2.5 million records every 6 hours to generate that. And we then overlay a very complex formula to actually then render it to look like that. And that's, once we put hardware on the ground, we take that sort of approach to actually then be able to do it at a crop, at a field, at a growth stage to contextualise the information and data. So we do it as a service because it's super hard. And I know Simon's going to talk about this later as well. Most growers, most people, I don't know about you, I can barely, run the remote for my television, let alone think about running a complex real-time data system on my farm. So therefore, what we do is we look at it as a service. How do we do IoT as a service? Hardware, platform, data, analytics, UI. If we do our job well, it all disappears, and what you're just left with is these very crisp, fantastic experiences that is helping growers answer the questions that matter, which is when do I plant, when do I feed, when do I protect, when do I fertilise, and when do I harvest. These are the things, the business processes that folks are focusing on. So I'm going to just quickly talk about oysters, because this was actually our first foray. We actually often say that oysters, like it's an entree to your meal, was an entree to our business. And the business problem that we were solving, and we developed a lot of the technology that we're now doing in agri actually in oysters. The business problem we were solving was that when it rains, because oysters are filter animals, they accumulate contaminants from runoff which make them dangerous to eat. The regulator is using rainfall as a proxy for runoff, which could be coming from 100 kilometres away. We put in real-time salinity, temperature, depth sensing. We measure the water that oysters drink, and just moving from that wide area to the localised, that we can reduce unnecessary closures by 30%, giving growers back 4 weeks a year. That is how you get an ROI of 4 times. The other important thing is we have a digital product that the food safety regulator uses, both New South Wales and Tasmania. We now regulate 50% of the oyster industry, relies on our technology for opening and closing and food safety. And we also have an enterprise productivity tool that growers use that help them make on-farm decisions. So we must have been stark raving nuts, because we put electronics in salt water, in open bay, in the roaring 40s. It doesn't get harder than that to deliver a reliable system. And we have a 99.5% uptime. And a lot of people in the audience will go, it should be 99.9 or more. But this is actually a really good outcome in the real world. And we've been doing this for 2 years now. And as I say, we're covering both Tasmania and about to roll it out across the whole of New South Wales. So a very real business problem that we're solving. So we're now actually taking that and shifting into agriculture. So a critical thing here is, again, we have been trialling for 2 years with Bosch as our R&D partner. We own the IP for our microclimate sensing system, but we actually deliver it together. Bosch is our R&D partner, and we will actually manufacture our hardware here in Australia. But we weren't just testing hardware. We were testing the platform, the analytics, and most importantly, the user interfaces. And we were looking at these 5 business processes that all growers manage. How to plant, how to irrigate, how to feed, how to protect, how to harvest. I'll drive you nuts saying that. And we co-developed it with growers. So we worked with 20 growers initially across Tasmania. They're the centre of the system. And we really focus on the end-to-end system, grower-centric design, really understanding the microclimate. And just to give you a very little story, I got a phone call from a grower yesterday, over the moon. When you get wind and you get spray drift, it's a real problem. It's a real legal liability. In fact, just a month ago in Victoria, the courts awarded $7 million against a grower because he had allowed spray drift onto another property. So up in Cressy, which is northwest of Tassie, everyone was not spraying because they were over 16 kilometres an hour. We were measuring 4.2, and he was the only grower in the whole northwest coast that could spray. And he was pretty damn happy, just on that one thing. So very important to understand that this is about microclimate. And critically, what happens is in the BOM, we're working on global forecasting systems that work on a grid. The global well forecasting system works on a 25 by 25 kilometre grid. We do farm, field, row, right down to the hotspot level. We can scale to 240 of these weather station nodes to one gateway and create a mesh, self-healing mesh on farm. This delivers beautiful data at a microclimate level, and all growers know that farms are very different from place to place. You put a shed up, you put a windbreak in, you have a tunnel, you have a rain cover, suddenly you've got a completely different microclimate that you're trying to manage. And that's what we designed our technology to do, to give us this incredibly reliable, scalable, enterprise-grade data stream that would tell you about what was happening localised, but then to contextualise it to the crop and the growth stage, which I'll come back to in a minute. So it's about data-driven decision making, and really importantly, the last one here, which I'm going to give some demos from the product so you can see what I mean, is one place to learn, act and record. And this is a really important issue. Growers are really over being in a million different places, having one little thing solving this problem here, another solution and app solving that problem here. We're creating a platform technology that brings that all together in one place and then allows them to act and task and then records that, including the data, which creates an auditable trail, which is part of the really important story of compliance. And, you know, compliance for growers, because what we grow has to be safe to be consumed, is a critical issue as well to understand. So, moving on, it's an ecosystem. These are the 12 factors that we actually measure in real time every 10 minutes, and we can do it, as I said, about 2,500 sensing points if you wanted to do that. Our base installation has an intelligent gateway and 3 nodes that collect these different factors, and we have that. These are the growing conditions. So I can just tell you, growers actually don't really care about weather. They're constantly converting it into their heads to growing conditions and business problems that they're trying to solve. And what we do is do that calculation for them and make it easy. So what I wanted to just show you here is the predictions accuracy. And this is part of our patented IP, which we're pretty damn excited about. We actually came second this year in the Global IoT Microsoft Awards for this technology. And what we're actually seeing here is 7.5 days out, these are just 3 by way of example, showing the actuals are the blues and the greens are predictions. So we're actually incredibly accurate. Once we have this down, our technology on the ground, we can give you a hyper-localised prediction of those growing conditions. Most growers describe it to us a little bit like putting on glasses for the first time, and you never want to take them off again. Because suddenly, instead of looking at a weather thing and going, oh, you know, it's slightly different, and I know that, you know, when I normally get these conditions, this is what's really happening, which we all do every day. We just take that all away and do it instantly. But growers never see that. That's actually in the back end. So what I really wanted to do is talk about how we actually do that from the user experience. I'm just going to skip forward to this because I'm keeping an eye, and Andrea's telling me that I've got limited time here. So in terms of how the user experience actually looks, once you set up our system, you set it up for a block and you set up a whole lot of information once in a web interface. And then the entire experience shifts into a mobile experience. So what you're seeing there is once it's actually set up for a field, in this case Pinot Noir, the little drops there now are no longer the drops for evapotranspiration for a base crop. They're actually made specific to the crop because we know the plant date or its growth stage, we know its expected harvest date, and so in the back end we shape the growth curve and adjust what's called a KC curve, which means that we're now showing for that plant at that growth stage what its water requirement is. And then the growing conditions are put in these very simple interfaces, which is showing you the predictions out that then come into a graph. So this is just giving you a very high level. When you dive into that field, you can see then when you go into the detail here, you can see this is where our predictions are coming out. So on that block where you have our piece of hardware, the orange bars there are showing you the amount of water the crop is losing and the amount of water that is coming in from rain, and the dark blue is showing the irrigation that's added in. So what that means is you've suddenly got a way to plan out over the next 7 days what you need for irrigation. We use 9,000 gigalitres of water in irrigation every year. That's 18 times Sydney Harbour. And growers are paying between $65 to $200 a megalitre for this. It's a big number. And our customers are telling us that they're saving about 30% on this. And what's really important is how to actually make sure that water allocation that you do have, which is increasingly going to cost, is used efficiently and effectively at the right crops at the right time. So then soil moisture. You know, nobody's going to make a decision just on an ETC calculation. No grower in their right mind would do that. The second question they're going to say is, what's my soil showing? So what we do is we measure soil moisture at 3 different levels, and then we use artificial intelligence to predict that as well. Now I've got 2 data points, and they'll probably still go and put their shovel in the soil, I would, and they'll take those 3 points decision and make an informed decision. And then every single thing, because remember I said that they act where they actually record, we in effect create a little Facebook page of a data stream of every single interaction with that block, which is collected and then becomes an auditable trail for compliance purposes. Really importantly, we stop people having to look at data and start telling them what they need to know when they need to know it. And so we did extensive user design on this, and I can tell you growers love pink. So I'm super proud of growers that they like pink. So our notifications are pink. And essentially what happens is that they can set them up, customize them. Each user can have their own. It's to the actual wherever we've got the hardware or a field, they can set them up to tell them when they have a problem. So in this case, looking at adverse spray conditions is the example I just gave you. This is a very real pain point. You know, one of our growers, he's a huge grower, contract sprayers all over his properties up the, over hundreds of hectares. He wants to know when there's a problem so that he can actually ring him and say stop and create an auditable trail because of the enormous compliance risk if you don't do this. So doing customizable alerts, what's really important about this is it means that we can, as new models become available, as we work with researchers like we are doing through the Food Agility Cooperative Research Centre, we can give researchers our data, they can create models, and we can just drop them in the back end as an alert. And this is a really important way about how we scale knowledge. And finally, this is the final example in relation to spraying to give you a bit more sense about what we mean about understanding the business system. So when you actually talk to a grower, yeah, they want to know when they should spray and they want to know when they shouldn't spray. That's important. But the business process they're managing is way more complex than that. And so what we actually did is spend a lot of time, so what we actually do, once set off, they set up what their equipment on farm is, their tanks for spraying, what size they are, a chemical inventory. We upload spray programs that come from agronomists that's attached to that field instead of on a piece of paper floating around in a cabin in a tractor. We then actually record all the withholding periods and re-entry periods, and we do the calculation of the amount of mix of chemicals, and we run a real-time inventory so they know if they're actually going to be running out of that chem before they get to the problem. So what we looked at is the end-to-end business system and how real-time data helps drive and interact with that, and all of that data then goes back into that feed yet again, so we have real-time water, energy, chemical use, which can then be repurposed into environmental sustainability reporting. So it's all about understanding the whole system. It's really been an incredible journey to get from where we were to where we are now. We're super excited to having launched the product. And the takeaways, I suppose, from the journey have been this is hard to do. It's very easy to do a proof of concept. It's much, much harder to actually create an enterprise grade, scalable solution that solves a real problem that people are willing to pay enough money for that you can make a buck as a business. And that's where we are now. So thanks very much.